Hi everyone, hopefully you can hear me. I just want to check everything's okay because we have gone live here today without a countdown or anything because of breaking news that's going on at the moment in Venezuela. Now, I'm being joined today by independent journalist writing for The Canary, UK, which I support and follow. No doubt you do too, watching this. And he's also written for International History Review, Jacobin Magazine, and Columbia Reports. I'm joined by John McEvoy. Hi, John. How are you?
Hi, Gordon. Very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Now, John's just come back from Venezuela, haven't you, John? And clear something up for me, mate, because when I watch the BBC and when I listen to The Guardian and when I read The Guardian, The Independent and Sky News, etc., on Venezuela, according to them, and if I was to read them, I'd certainly get the impression that their elections are rigged, they're a dictatorship, they're all bad, socialism has basically ruined the country, it's nobody else's fault but theirs, and basically we're meant to go in there and save the day, and that's the situation. However, from my reporting and from the people that I've actually read, I get totally a different scenario in my head come back, because I've got hold on a minute, these elections are the freest and the fairest probably in the world, and actually there's people like Jimmy Carter, ex-president Jimmy Carter, who've testified to that. And then when you actually look at the fabric of the country and you start going outside the normal realms of Western media, and you start looking at other people who have been there to the country, you get a totally distinct, different view. For instance, if you look at Western media, you get the view that it's a very culturalized country, it's very modern, it's very Western. But then when you actually speak to other people, no, it's not that at all, and you're getting a very tainted, very almost racist view of the country there, and it's very one-sided, because actually the country is quite large. And it's very diverse, and it's got a huge population that is indigenous to the country out there in the barrios. And what this Bolivarian revolution has done is it's brought democracy to the country, whereas it didn't have it before. And the rich people are really not too happy about this because they're losing money. Now, please, John, you've been there for the last for 3 weeks, I think you went there.
3 weeks,
Which is right? Am I right sitting here in my council flat getting about £1,000 a month doing what I'm doing, or is the BBC and The Guardian and the Independent right, and the New York Times? Who is right here, John?
It's unfortunately for the case of the corporate media, you're absolutely correct. When I actually arrived, I mean, if you read what I wrote about Venezuela before I actually went, you'll see that I was very sceptical and critical of the Western media's kind of representation of the country anyway. But in the first few days after arriving, I was thinking I'm not actually sure what to write about kind of daily life here, because I just thought nobody's going to believe how the kind of normalcy of day-to-day life that people are kind of getting up, they're going to work. At this point, this wasn't during the times of the blackouts, and I was just thinking if I, which I did, if I kind of try and present what's actually going on in this country, people will really struggle to believe this, because they've just been inundated with misrepresentations, with falsehoods, for weeks, not even weeks, for years on end, about Venezuela, about what's going on inside the country. You know, this kind of drip feed of propaganda that leaves you with the exact perception that you described, that it's a country that's suffering a brutal dictatorship, that's held up by these private armed groups, that is suffering a humanitarian crisis, that people are dying on the streets of hunger. So yeah, I mean, as you said, on the subject of democracy, if you just look over the sea to France, I mean, there's never been spoken about in the media whatsoever. And you've got people, you've got the police beating people nearly to death week in, week out. Those are scenes that I just did. Those types of scenes of, you know, a country in complete political crisis, where kind of people are hitting the streets in violent conflicts every weekend. That I just didn't see any evidence of that whatsoever. Secondly, I mean, the opposition was free to protest. In many cases, they didn't even bother to show up. And when they did, they'd gone home by lunchtime, which is another reason why I struggle to believe that this renewed attempt today will work, because there's so little public enthusiasm for the opposition, especially the Popular Will opposition party. Yeah, and when you talk about culture as well, it's quite funny when you see in the Western media, you see, I forget what I think it was Art World that published this article that was saying, the Maduro regime is allowing Picasso paintings to wilt during the blackout because they're not being kept properly, and as a result, culture is dying. I mean, it just represents what the Western media perceives as culture itself, which is this elite version of what culture is. But when you actually go there, I mean, there's so many different forms of grassroots cultural organisation that's kind of largely organised by collectivos that are incidentally completely demonised within the Western media.
Let me ask you this, John. You say that there. You say that there's aspects of the culture there that we don't see. Now, Western journalists going there, for instance, journalists from CNN, journalists from BBC, journalists from the Guardian, etc. Would they see what you saw based on the fact that they just stop in totally different places to what you stopped in, didn't you?
Yeah, and I mean, on the subject of CNN, they don't just stop in different places. They're they're embedded. They're often embedded within the US military. I mean, Nick Valencia, I don't recall if you saw him reporting for CNN. He was stood in front of the military plane, supposedly carrying humanitarian aid, that brought him to the border with Venezuela, and started just rifling on about how there was a complete absence of goods. There was no toothpaste, there was no toothbrushes in Venezuela. And then you've got another layer of how the Western journalists don't really engage in with normal ordinary people, or at least the poorest people in Venezuela. There was an NPR article that said, it's extremely. We tried to plough the depths of Chavismo, to create this kind of image that you have to really go deep down into this dark pit to get to people who support the government. I think that journalist managed to speak to 3 altogether. And now if you go to anywhere in the west of Caracas, I mean, you literally just have to leave the house, and people speak to you, especially if you've got a camera out. I mean, they're so aware of how bad the media's coverage of the country is that they'll literally speak to you. They'll be like, please, can you report truthfully about what's going on? I mean, street vendors will say, we're struggling. Many people are struggling, for sure. However, I mean, we're not starving of hunger. We're not dying of hunger.
Yeah, they're not dying of hunger. They know how the West is. Obviously, the Western media are portraying this. But, for a dictatorship, that 90% of the media in Venezuela is against him as well, isn't it? Did you find evidence of that when you were over there?
Yeah, large parts of the media are against him. And if you go on the vast majority of radio stations, for instance, you'll hear them saying, can I swear on this?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
This is YouTube, John. This is YouTube. Right, this is not the fucking BBC, mate. I don't know what audience we've got. No, but you hear people say, "My daughter, fuck your mother," calling his mother all sorts of names. I mean, it's not just that there are wide parts of the media that are free to criticise the government. They're just mouthing off about his family, personally insulting him. Which is fine, but I mean, it's evidence that it's not a dictatorship.
Yeah, I mean, the main evidence that it's not a dictatorship is that you see Guaido for maybe, I think this is the 4th time that he's been consistently trying, but this is kind of like the 4th time that he's tried to urge a military uprising in the country. Now, if you imagine that happening in the UK or the US, so imagine that Nancy Pelosi, for example, asks Russia to help her, overthrow the government with the help of the US military. I mean, she'd likely already be dead.
Yes.
If not awaiting execution.
Yeah, she would be a traitor, wouldn't she? She'd be calling for an overthrow of her own government. She'd be dead within, you know.
Yeah, and I mean all the Venezuelan government has done thus far to Guaido, as far as I'm aware, has banned him from public office for just 12 years, which is wildly light punishment, if you ask me. I mean, that's obviously a tactical move, because if they do anything more serious, then the US will use that as justification that, you know, oh, they're restricting democracy, or they've locked up our man in Venezuela. So he'll become this kind of symbolic prisoner, a little bit like Leopoldo Lopez did. So I mean, it's obviously a tactical move, but at the same time, it's evidence that this isn't a dictatorship.
Yeah, it's evidence it's not a dictatorship. Now, I mean, we had we mentioned this briefly off air. I mean, it does seem to be this is the tactic that they're using at the moment with Guaido. I mean, let's just talk a little bit about this guy, because this is somebody who was educated in America. Is that correct?
He was, yeah.
And he was educated from, I mean, it was one of these well-to-do schools that is well indoctrinated. The CIA have had all sorts of people affiliated with the CIA, rather, have been known to come out of these avenues, haven't they?
Yeah.
So it does look like he's just their prime puppet that they want to put in. But it does seem that this tactic, I mean, it seems like it's more desperate to me. Do you get that feeling, this like fourth attempt you say? And it's just a handful. To those of you who don't know at the moment, you know, just before we went on air, we heard that Guaido was in the middle of Caracas, was it, with a handful of generals, etc., and a small force. I got word it was between 200 and 500. I don't know how true is that.
1,000 earlier, but it's still quite insignificant.
Yeah, it's a small force, and they're all wearing, I heard, blue armbands to distinguish, I suppose, which are pro-Guaido forces and which are pro-Maduro, or, as I said on Twitter, which are bought from by the CIA and which aren't. It does seem more desperate, though, this tactic does, and it looked like this is something more that he's doing this to elicit a response that then that can be used to escalate it, rather than actually this have any credible chance of him overthrowing the government, doesn't it, John?
Yeah, because if you look at the direction it's been going for many weeks now, I mean, it's hard to put a date of when it started, but let's say the 23rd of January when Trump recognised Guaido. For the weeks since, I mean, his support has seemed to just deflate and deflate and deflate. When I was there, they would organise protests and people wouldn't bother to turn up, or they'd just be going home by lunchtime. If you look at the videos from the last couple of weeks, he's called these supposedly huge protests in Caracas, and you can fit everybody in the frame from maybe like 50 meters away. They're really not popular protests at the moment. So the coup's going downhill. There's no real suggestion that the military would be more likely to join him at this stage rather than another. So it's difficult to say what his tactic is at the moment, but it seems likely that perhaps he's trying to provoke a reaction from the Venezuelan military and create some kind of, you know, symbolic justification to, you know, a kind of symbolic event for the West to say, oh, look what's happening in Venezuela.
Yeah, a similar thing. The reason I ask is a similar thing. I'm trying to remember back in, I think it was 2013, there was another coup attempt, wasn't there? I think it was 2013. There have been so many. You lose track of which one's what. But I seem to remember there was some excellent reporting at the time by Abby Martin from the Empire Files, and they used a flare up, and the media twisted a flare up from a shooting on a bridge. Do you remember this? Can you shed any light on it?
This, I believe, was the 2002 coup attempt. Or maybe
2002.
Yeah. I mean, there were people protesting, and there was a sniper on a roof, and some people got shot, and the narrative was instantly created that these were these were actors on behalf of Hugo Chavez, and that was used to create a narrative that, you know, this this has been done on behalf of the government, and the government's now promoting the killing of civilians, but it actually turned out that these were just rogue actors.
Was that the coup was that the one that led to Chavez being held at gunpoint? I seem to remember that happening around that time, didn't it?
Unless I'm getting mixed up.
Like I said, there's so many, isn't there?
There's been various kind of smaller and larger attempts, but in 2002, there was basically a coup attempt that it was revealed quite soon after that had been backed and funded by the CIA to get rid of Chavez. The military withdrew him from the office. They held him for 3 days, and then the people eventually. But this was not just a coup by the military. This was a coup by the media as well.
Yeah.
Because there was absolutely no coverage of what was actually going on at this point. Nobody had actually explained that Chavez had been removed in a military coup. They'd actually said that he'd resigned. However, people took to the streets and basically reinstated Chavez. Within 72 hours.
Yeah, I know there was another one, I think, in 2000. I can't remember whether there was 3 or 4 coup attempts now, but obviously this is the latest. Now, what's the reason behind this? I'm of the view that there are many reasons, chief of which there are 297 billion of them underneath Venezuelan soil in the form of barrels of oil. That's what this is all about, isn't it? Really, John. Is that what you can see? For obviously having been over there and on the ground there.
Yeah, well, it's obviously a large part, and the frustrating thing about this coup is that the Trump administration is so frank about their imperialist intentions.
And it's also who he's putting into key positions as well, isn't it? It's not just his rhetoric; it's the whole Elliot Abrams and Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel. The whole, you talk of a troika of tyranny. Just look at those 3.
Yeah. So people are calling it the quiet part out loud administration, where they're saying the parts that past administrations would keep quiet. So you've got John Bolton saying that it'd be great for US corporations if we could get our hands on Venezuela's oil assets. And so you've got them just openly saying that a major part of this coup attempt is to do with oil. And the media is just ignoring it. Back in 2017, you had a FBI director quoting Trump as saying, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. Yeah. Why aren't we at war with them?
And they're on our back door. He said that, didn't he? He said, they're on our back door. Why aren't we there?
Yeah. So, you've got this kind of overwhelming evidence. The administration is telling us that this is, to a large degree, about oil. And the media is just like no.
Yeah, this is. I want to ask you about this so much because you obviously cover the news over here. You obviously write for the Canary. I view the Canary as sort of like the last bastion of hope in the media in our country. It really is. It's the model of what I think the Canary is the model of what I think journalism should be going forward, whether that be left wing, right wing, or whatever. They're objective, and I really like that about them. But apart from their reporting on this, the rest of them, especially the what you would class the corporate media and the BBC especially, their silence with regards to the Trump administration, such as blaseness about this. I looked at the BBC's reporting on this, John. Honestly, I couldn't find any instance on anything that they've written with regards to the Venezuela crisis since the beginning of the year. I can't see them even mentioning Elliot Abrams' name. How can you not do that? Surely that's a dereliction of duty not to inform the public, oh, by the way, this guy was found guilty of lying about shipping arms into South American countries to create a coup, and then was pardoned for it by George Bush, and now he's doing the same thing again. How can the BBC not say that to their audience and still think that they're doing their job?
Well, on that specific point, it actually gets worse because the BBC published an article called Venezuela's Bridge Crisis, Trojan Horse or Humanitarian Aid. And in that article, they actually managed to omit any mention that the person in charge of Venezuela, the Venezuelan Special Envoy Elliot Abrams, had used humanitarian aid as a Trojan horse, like word, to ship arms to the Contras in Nicaragua in the 1980s. So I mean, they actually had an article entitled, we're going to answer this question, and somehow that information slipped through the writer and the editors.
Yeah, you say somehow there with a smile on your face, because honestly, I mean, it is the jury's like the jury's not out anymore. The jury's come back. They've said, our BBC and our corporate media is not fit for purpose, and they've buggered off 5 years ago. It's really that blatant, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean the BBC in particular as well is kind of an important case because it's just been historically on the side of kind of ruinous British foreign policy. If you take, there's some parallels that we can take. If you look at 1953, the UK-US backed coup in Iran that was just openly about oil. I mean, the Iranian government had just nationalised its oil interests, which were owned by what became BP. So
it was the Anglo-Iranian oil company, wasn't it? And exactly. It became BP.
Exactly. So the BBC actually announced that coup to people in Iran by slightly modifying one of their programs to kind of act as a siren. Right, this is happening now. I mean, if you look at its coverage of Iraq as well, a Cardiff University study found that it was the most pro-Iraq war broadcaster, and I mean that ahead of broadcasters like Sky News. So I mean, it has major form on acting as a mouthpiece of the British Defence Ministry.
Well, do you think I mean, I'm of the view with the BBC especially, and I don't want to get too much into the BBC on this because obviously we want to talk about Venezuela, but I'm of the view that they do great work so they're charged with three things on their mandate, aren't they? It's to inform, to entertain, and to educate. That's the three things that they're. And so, with regards to the education and the entertaining, I mean, I think they're probably the best in the world. I mean, they're entertaining. For instance, their sports events. I think their coverage is just second to none. You try watching Olympic Games coverage on ESPN and compare that to BBC. There's no difference.
And stuff like
it's night and day rather. But with regards to obviously informing, they're not doing their job, are they? So I mean, and they're stealing. Obviously, I call it stealing £150.50 off every household in the country, and that's about to go up, and it's about to, I think, if the House of Lords get their way, it's about to include pensioners as well. Well, they want to take away the free TV licence from pensioners, the House of Lords. Do you think it's savable? Is the point I'm trying to make? With 70, 100 years or whatever it is of this propaganda sort of ingrained into them, and obviously there's such an intertwining now of government and state broadcaster, especially since David Cameron made his changes a few years ago with regard to who was on the board there. Do you think it's savable at all? It's the $64,000 question, I know, but I'm just interested.
I mean, looking at the history of its coverage, I don't have much hope for it improving.
Honestly, John, I ask everybody that question, and everybody's reaction is exactly the same as yours. It's all like, "Come on!" It's like, I don't what. I think everybody is of the view that it's unsavable now.
Yeah. I wrote quite a large article on its coverage of Venezuela, and one of the journalists it sent to cover Venezuela was a woman called Orla Guerin, and she had an interview with the president, with Maduro, and she introduced him firstly, insultingly, as the other president in the presidential palace in Miraflores. She, in the tweet when she shared it, she said, I spoke to Nicolas Maduro, who is currently occupying the presidential palace. I mean, there isn't even an attempt to disguise the position that the BBC holds on this. And I also showed in the article that it's supporting it through a host of articles, that it's supporting all three propaganda points that are justifying military intervention, or at least regime change. I mean, even the words regime change are problematic, because it assumes that there is a regime in the first place that needs changing, where many would argue in the case of Venezuela that it's just a democratically elected government with major problems, just like you see across Western Europe. So yeah, I mean, it was promoting the narrative that it's a dictatorship. It claimed on various times, or at least it quoted people without challenging them, that it was a rigged election in 2018, when every international observer that went to the country said the absolute opposite. The second narrative it was promoting was that there is a humanitarian crisis. In one video, they described the scenes as apocalyptic. I mean, they're creating these really strong emotional responses to what's going on in Venezuela, which any passive observer is just going to look at and say, Jesus Christ, what the fuck's going on there? Something needs to be done, and then when you have this something needs to be done, it always presupposes that the something is going to be something better, and when the something is US interference, which it always is when it comes to intervention in a country in this kind of context, then the something is not always better. It's actually consistently or comprehensively worse. And thirdly, the BBC, this the third propaganda point that and the final propaganda point that it was pushing, was that it threatened the national security, that Venezuela is currently threatening the national security of Western states, or at least the US, which is just absurd. I mean, you've got Colombia and Brazil, two US allies. I mean, Brazil's got a fascist president at the moment, and Colombia's got about 7 US bases in the country. Somehow they managed to allude that Venezuela might be a national security threat to the US, which is it's just gobsmacking the amount of nonsense that are supposedly impartial or objective news site.
Yeah, you brought up Bolsonaro there. I know it's no coincidence that for the last few days, Bolsonaro's son has been on the border with Venezuela, doing pieces to camera with various people who are presumably Venezuelan refugees about the crisis, and you can see how it's all been building up, and it's no coincidence that he's on the border up there just at the same time as this is happening with Guaido. It does seem orchestrated and coordinated, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what's kind of interesting about what happened on the 23rd of February, though, when they tried to force the humanitarian aid trucks over the border, was that the Brazilian military was kind of like, we don't really want to start a conflict on this border. I mean, it's going to end in absolute chaos. Completely unpredictable forms of chaos that, I mean, if you look at Libya, for example, the chaos that the intervention unleashed there is just something that no border country would want to participate in. So the Brazilian military actually took a step back and thought, Jesus Christ, this might actually be a terrible idea for everybody. Which would be nice if Colombia. It'd be really nice if Colombia might think about the same thing, given so many refugees have been going back and forth between both countries. I mean, over about 10 million over the past 70 years. However, the Colombian government is so neatly in Washington's pocket that it's just been pushing this coup and pushing.
You've written extensively on Colombia, haven't you? I noticed earlier when I was looking at some of the stuff you've done. You've written extensively. It is Colombia that you've written on, and the resource grab that has gone on over there. I was looking at. Yeah,
my main kind of research project is British involvement in Colombia over the past 30 years, in which basically what I argue is the British state was arming and supporting the Colombian military, which at the time was one of, and continues to be one of the worst abuses of human rights in the Western Hemisphere, with really deep links to paramilitary organisations in the country. And this was all within a political violence that had been exported to the country by the US in the 1960s, political violence that was waged on behalf of private capital within counterinsurgency warfare. And what I argue is Britain basically contributed to this political violence on behalf of British Petroleum's massive capital interests in the country. I mean, by 2000, it was the largest foreign direct investor in Colombia.
Surely not, John. Surely not. Surely BP and the British establishment would never do us anything so bad.
No, that stuff is surely in the past.
But when you were over there for 3 weeks, wasn't it? You were over there in Venezuela.
In Venezuela, yeah.
And where was it? Caracas you were stopping in, you say?
Yeah, I was staying in the west of Caracas.
But yeah. it was sort of like the poorer side. Is there anything really that you would like to say that surprised? What surprised you the most about the country, really?
The main thing was the kind of what's the word? The immense amount of social organisation that's going on in the country. I'll give you a few examples. So you've got this.
With regards to social, with regards to like democratic, socialism, that way, do you mean?
Well, there were processes of grassroots democracy that were kind of put into place or triggered after Hugo Chavez was elected as part of the kind of Bolivarian revolution that was instilled in the 1999 constitution. That was basically based around transferring power and political power to local communities to organise various means of their own daily life, ranging from education to healthcare to various other sectors. And I feel my analysis of the country was that the kind of power shift that was initiated during these years has kind of created a kind of mass democratic movement that is allowing the country to actually survive at the moment. So at the moment, you've got this CLAP, which are kind of 18-kilogram food packages that are distributed to around 60% of the population at the moment. And the whole distribution process is carried out by volunteers. And every kind of, apart from the actual buying of the food, kind of every process of, every part of the process is organised by volunteers. I mean, they're going into their local areas, they're conducting censuses to find out who needs what, how many people are in each house, etc., etc.
So 18 kilograms. Sorry, John. Sorry to interrupt you. 18 kilogram, did you say?
Yes. So
that's what 9 bags of sugar, isn't it? About 9 bags of sugar.
Yeah.
And that is how often do they get those?
Either bi-weekly or monthly.
So either bi-weekly or monthly, and you say 60% of the population get those.
Yeah,
and this is given them?
It's subsidised by the government massively, so it costs around I can't remember. I think it was about 25 cents in US dollars to purchase one of these CLAP food boxes,
which isn't really a true. You can't really tell how much that is actually worth because it's totally screwed up the currencies, isn't it, with the hyperinflation?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's quite a minor. I mean, this whole CLAP organisation was in response to what was becoming a major food crisis during 2016, especially. So I mean, yeah, it's incredibly effective. But then there's also forms of organisation that are not directly linked to any form of the government. So you've got people that are buying food directly from the producers, the agricultural producers. They're kind of skipping the whole value chain, of the supermarket, where you have to pay the staff and then you have to pay. And many of the private supermarkets, people feel are waging class warfare against the general population by hiking prices. Not only hiking prices of staple food items that the majority of the population or the poorest people need for day-to-day life, such as corn flour, which is needed to make the arepas. So they're trying to bypass all the different bypass and insulate themselves from the kind of capitalist processes that they feel to a large degree are the source of their economic discontent at the moment.
Yeah, it does seem like it's a fight like for socialism or for true socialism against capitalism. That's almost like that's the two sides here that are actually fighting each other, and it's nothing to do with him being a dictatorship or anything like that. It's literally just capitalism trying to stop socialism from infringing on their profits, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two parallel forms of kind of struggle that are going on at the moment within the country. You kind of have this mostly European white elite. Many of the it's almost an oligarchical structure where you get certain members of the opposition parties and the opposition leadership that are related to former presidents who are also family with former presidents. And these are descendants of people who are just kind of accustomed to ruling the country. Like Leopoldo Lopez, for example, has family that were former presidents, and this is the leader of the Popular Will Party that Juan Guaido is part of. So you have this kind of internal class struggle where they kind of want to regain power for themselves, and they're not quite happy with the socioeconomic changes that happened with the Bolivarian Revolution, where dignity was kind of restored, or many of the poor Afro-Venezuelans or indigenous people felt that dignity had been restored to their day-to-day life. They could get an education. They could kind of they could do emancipatory things with the things they needed to live as well. So there's that class struggle that's going on inside the country, and then you have the kind of white European elite that are allied with the US, who are inviting foreign military intervention into their country, which is also based on capital. So
it's strange. You bring that up. You bring the. I spoke to Ben Norton about Venezuela a couple of months ago, and he mentioned how there's a real sort of race issue here that is really unreported. In that you saying there that it's generally the whiter parts of society that are sort of the affluent, if you like. And the poorer people tend to be these people who are indigenous and of darker skin. And this is something that Ben Norton mentioned as well. It's certainly something that is underreported, if not just ignored totally by our media, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an element of the situation that's ignored. And I mean, if you look at the journalists that are going out there, I can't speak so much, but they're mostly just kind of a lot of the journalists. There's another layer of the journalistic problem, is that you get these kind of white privileged journalists that have gone to private schools and then gone to Oxford or whatever, and they make all the mistakes abroad that they make with the domestic public, and often even worse, because they don't perceive of a different side of life that they've never been in contact with. And you see that in the reporting. You actually see it when you get these comments, like when you try and plunge the depths of Chavismo, as if it's this scary, they have this primal fear of the kind of ordinary people of the country, and this, to go back to the racial.
Just before you put a pin on that, because you brought up something there that I have talked about just endlessly especially over the last few months, because I'm really going after the media at the moment, and really I'm so pissed off with the BBC especially and the mainstream media. I honestly think that they are totally and utterly pissing all over their own their own profession. and they're just literally shooting themselves in the head at the moment with regards to the Julian Assange situation, and you know, we don't have a fourth estate. I've really got a massive problem with it. And you mentioning there how when journalists go over to Venezuela, they've almost got a fear of it. It sort of plays into something that I talk about all the time, John, and that's how they're a diverse breed. I don't want to say breed, or they're a diverse group of people. Journalists are. They'll come, you know, you've got white journalists, you've got black journalists, you've got Chinese journalists, you've got female journalists, you've got gay journalists, you've got the LGBTQ journalists. But if you look at these establishment outlets, they're all from the same goddamn backgrounds. They're all from privately educated, high, well-to-do, you know, Eton, Cambridge, blah, 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 and these private schools. And when they go to these places like Venezuela, they wouldn't even dream of going to the place that you visited. I mean, you tweeted out a picture of where you were stopping, and, you know, they wouldn't dream of going there, would they? And do you get the feeling that that is really one of the main problems that we've got at the moment with our media, not just in this country, but in the West as well, especially in America, in that the media that we've got all come from the same bloody class, and they all think the same way, and that's essentially why I think that they've got the jobs that they've got, because they all think the same way.
Yeah, and then you get these kind of outliers that are these working class journalists that made it, but I mean they just have the same views as the rest of them, so it makes no difference anyway. And there's the root of the problem with journalism itself, especially in the UK anyway, a society that's so kind of class based, is that you in the UK if you want to go anywhere in journalism, I mean previously at least, you'd finish uni. You'd have to go and take an unpaid internship for 1 or 2 years in London to be able to actually get on the ladder.
Who could afford that?
Once you're on the ladder, you'll probably get paid like very little. And I mean, who's able to do that? No ordinary person has the financial means to be able to go to London, do an unpaid internship for 2 years, and so there's a filtration process. It's not just, as Chomsky describes, ideological, but it's also economic in the UK. So ordinary people are economically filtered out of the journalistic process, which is why I think outlets like the Canary are important, because they give a means for people, for a different kind of people, whatever you think about journalism, to get involved and to.
Well, you mentioned the Canary there, John, and I want to, I can't say enough good things about the Canary, because they're reporting on this. They're reporting on the Venezuela crisis, for instance. Just pick that out. I mean, you could pick pretty much any subject over the last 2 years out, if you ask me, and they're outstanding. But if you look at the Venezuela reporting, it's been outstanding, and it's like night and day compared to actually, what you get in the Guardian or what you get in the Independent, because it really is a slanted view. Whereas in the Canary, I do get the feeling that you just get the truth. And you don't get, people trying to champion one side or the other. It's just like, this is the situation, and this is the way it is on the ground. This is the truth. And I for one appreciate reporters like yourself who are doing that, knowing that, it's not necessarily going to help you career-wise, essentially, when you look at the way, journalism is set up in this country, and the way, as you say, who can afford to take those internships? So I, for one, really want to thank you and your colleagues at the Canary just for what you've done. It's been excellent, so thanks.
Thanks very much. I'll pass it on to them.
Now, is there anything, obviously we've been going, 45, is there anything that you want to mention before we go? Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at jmcavoy2, JMCEVOY2. Trying to think if there's anything else.
I wanted to ask you, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I haven't brought up in questions? Because obviously I just go off in all sorts of directions, and I might have messed about with your thought process. But is there anything that you wanted to talk about really, and I can put it in here?
I suppose like a lot of people that are, I imagine a lot of your listeners will know some of these outlets already anyway. But whenever I speak to people about Venezuela and they say, "Oh, well, I don't know, the economy seems okay," or they say, "Oh, well, can you not suggest some alternatives?" And so yeah, I'll suggest some alternatives. Obviously, I recommend the Canary. Grey Zone's been doing great work. Max Blumenthal's project. Venezuela Analysis is just a staple. All of its editors are on the ground in Venezuela, doing really important work. So them, us, I think with us three.
Yeah, they you start running out after that, don't you? You start running out. It's like, oh well, Venezuela, Abby Martin, Empire Files, they're great. And then you start, okay, everybody else is pretty much bullshit, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the state of affairs, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well,
it's I mean, at least it's. I mean, is it improving? I feel like it is, but I mean, I'm quite young, so I don't know.
I don't know. So you say that, is it improving? Yeah, I like to feel as if it is, but then I keep thinking, is that just because I'm in a little bubble and, you know, I maybe can see more now just because I'm looking for it more? So I hope so. I hope so. And while there are journalists out there like you, then there's always got a chance that it's going to get better. John McEvoy, I really want to thank you very much for coming on. I want to thank you for what you're doing. And go follow John on Twitter at J McEvoy 2, did you say?
Yeah.
I'll put it on the screen when I drop this video, because I will be dropping this video in segments as well. Thanks very much, John. And to you all, thanks very much for watching. And I'll edit this video and drop it. Thanks very much, everybody. Peace and take care.